Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive.
From AI-inspired insights from farmers.
If you're enjoying what we're doing here, we'd love to hear from you too.
Absolutely.
Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and definitely leave a comment telling us what you want to see more of on this deep dive.
We're always looking for new ideas, and we really value your feedback.
So what farm-related mysteries are you dying to uncover?
Right.
What questions are keeping you up at night? Let us know, and maybe we'll tackle them in a future deep dive.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. We sift through stacks of information to bring you the key insights.
And today, we're really digging into the world of agriculture.
That's right. Specifically, we're looking at the current landscape for anyone new to farming or maybe thinking about getting into it. Our goal here is to get a handle on the big economic shifts happening right now and some of the trends that are starting to emerge.
Yeah, we've gone through quite a bit agricultural news, economic reports from places like CME Group and the USDA's research service.
Policy analysis from IFPRI, SARHR, looked at global trade stuff too.
Exactly. And what really stands out is how connected everything is. Global events having real impacts right down to the local farm level.
That's what we want to unpack today.
It's definitely a complex picture. We found there were some pretty significant challenges, but also maybe some interesting pathways for people just starting out.
So we'll be covering quite a range of tariff disputes, how trade patterns are changing.
Supply chain headaches, the kind of surprising role of social media.
Right. And also how communities are coping, showing some resilience.
Let's dive in.
Okay, first up, this idea of tariff turmoil. We saw an article, I think it was Contera, that really hammered home the potential downsides of trade disputes for U.S. farmers.
Yes, that piece was quite pointed. The basic threat they outline is, well, it's that our big trading partners think China, Mexico, Canada might just permanently switch who they buy from.
Permanently, like find new suppliers and stick with them.
Exactly. They might turn to competitors in Brazil, Argentina, maybe Australia, Russia, the EU, Southeast Asia.
And they gave examples, right? Like China buying record amounts of soybeans from Brazil.
Precisely. And the worry is they lock in longer deals there. Or, U.S. pork, poultry, beef exports could start lagging behind competitors in the EU or Asia.
And once those supply chains shift, getting that market share back is, well, it sounds really difficult.
It's incredibly tough. That's what the Contera piece emphasized. It's not just flipping a switch.
And it's not just about losing sales either, is it? They also talked about costs going up for farmers while revenues might be flat or even falling. That sounds like a real squeeze.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
Tariffs on stuff farmers need to import fertilizer, machinery parts that directly inflates their operating expenses.
So how much are we talking?
The analysis suggested input costs, like fertilizer, could stay inflated by, say, 10 to 25%, maybe even more.
Wow.
Plus, potential delays, getting machinery parts, things breaking down. That adds cost and hassle too.
Which just narrows those profit margins even further, makes it harder to handle debt, invest back into the farm.
Exactly. It tightens everything up financially.
And while the U.S. is dealing with these disputes, what are competitors doing? Just waiting?
Oh, definitely not. That same Contera article pointed out that competitors are actually strengthening their own alliances.
Ah, so they're building new partnerships.
Yeah, regional partnerships are growing. New trade deals are being signed that, well, don't include the U.S.
Like the BRICS countries.
For example, strengthening their trade ties. Or China may be putting more money into infrastructure in Latin America to secure supplies.
So the worry is that deals excluding the U.S. become more normal, especially in Asia and Africa.
That's a distinct possibility that was raised, yeah.
It really sounds like trade policy is weighing heavily on farmers' minds. We saw that in the CME Group Ag Economy Barometer data.
Right, that barometer gives a good snapshot of farmer sentiment.
That's a feeling.
Well, the recent survey showed trade policy was a top concern for almost half, 44% of farmers looking ahead 5 years.
That's significant.
And even more, 48% thought a trade war causing a drop in U.S. farm exports was likely or very likely. So, yeah, there's definitely anxiety there.
Okay, so that's the farmer perspective. What about the wider economy? We looked at some analysis from CARD, that's the Center for Agricultural and Rural Development. They modeled the cost of blanket tariffs.
And the numbers they came up with are pretty staggering.
How staggering.
Their models suggested, with the kind of tariff levels being discussed, like 60% on China, 10% on others, the U.S. economy could lose over $910 billion.
Billion with the B.
With a B. And a global efficiency loss of around $360 billion. Interestingly, though, They found many U.S. trade partners might actually gain from trade being diverted away from the U.S.
Gain. Like who?
The EU was highlighted as a potential big beneficiary if the U.S. sort of goes it alone with tariffs. Canada, though, could lose out because its economy is so tied to the U.S.
It's hard to wrap your head around those figures, and we should probably mention briefly the aid that was paid out to farmers during the Trump administration tariffs. A Forbes piece put that cost into perspective.
Yeah, comparing it to other huge federal expenses like spending on nuclear forces.
Yeah.
It just underscores how significant the economic impact of those tariffs was, needing such large aid packages.
Okay, so tariffs are causing major ripples, but how are countries actually adapting when trade gets disrupted like this? We saw some examples in an IFPRI report, the International Food Policy Research Institute. They called it crop swap consequences.
Right, it's not like trade just stops. Countries find workarounds. The IFPRI report showed how China managed its soybean needs after the trade tensions flared up with the U.S.
They just bought from somewhere else.
Pretty much. They massively increased soybean imports from Brazil. IFPRI's data showed Brazil's share of China's imports shot up over 78% at one point, while the U.S. share dropped significantly. A clear strategic shift.
Makes sense. What other examples did they have?
Well, they look at the war in Ukraine and its impact on wheat, especially
Yeah.
for a big importer like Egypt.
Egypt relies heavily on that Black Sea region, right?
Extremely heavily. So when the war hit, global wheat prices soared. Egypt had to scramble to find other suppliers. France, Bulgaria, Romania, even India, which wasn't a typical source for them.
Must have been challenging.
Very. They faced high prices, plus their own currency was weak, which made the subsidized bread they provide much more expensive. It led to price hikes for consumers.
Are they doing anything long-term?
Yeah, they're trying to build more grain storage, new silos, and encourage more wheat production domestically, trying to become a bit less reliant.
Okay, and there was one more case study in the IFPRI report about rice.
Yes, involving India restricting its rice exports and the effect that had on Senegal. Senegal imports a lot of broken rice, mostly from India.
So when India restricted exports,
Senegal's imports from India just plummeted, and prices for rice in Senegal shot up.
ouch. How did they cope?
They quickly put in place some tax waivers and things to make it easier to import from other places like Brazil, Pakistan, Thailand. Eventually, trade with India started up again after some talks and prices came down, but it really shows how vulnerable you can be if you depend too much on one supplier.
These crop swaps really do show how the global market adjusts, even if it's painful for some. And thinking about disruptions, that IFPRI report also mentioned wider supply chain issues, didn't it? Which ties back to what Contera said about machinery parts earlier.
Exactly. IFPRI highlighted how things like the pandemic, the war, export bans, they've all shaken up trading patterns
Yeah.
and made prices more volatile.
So it's not just one thing, it's a combination.
Right. And when you add that to the potential for, say, machinery parts shortages that Contera mentioned, you see how farmers get hit by rising costs and potential delays. It layers the problems.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. This next part is, well, fascinating. We looked at an article from Burnham talking about a kind of trade war of minds happening on platforms like TikTok.
Yeah, this is a really different angle. The idea is that short viral videos can actually shape how people feel about brands, about national identity, even economic power, maybe as much as government policies can.
How does that work? They had an example, right?
They did. A TikTok clip showing a fancy American handbag, but it had a Made in China label and was being sold there for way less than in the U.S. That kind of thing challenges people's ideas about quality, where things come from.
It messes with perceptions.
Exactly. It's like this subtle messaging that works on the psychological level.
Yeah.
Emotions guiding perception more than just facts and figures.
So TikTok becomes a tool for what? Soft influence, shaping how younger people see things like self-sufficiency or globalization.
That's the argument. And the article noted the irony China, often seen as more closed off, might be using this very open platform to subtly influence consumers elsewhere, including in the U.S.
And the algorithms play a big role, I assume, pushing content that gets a reaction.
Definitely. Algorithms tend to amplify stuff that confirms what you already think or stuff that really provokes an emotion, good or bad.
Which raises concerns, doesn't it? About whether platforms might favor stories that benefit their home country.
It does. There are worries about whether a platform like TikTok, owned by a Chinese company, might consciously or unconsciously push narratives helpful to China. Just like U.S.-based platforms have faced similar questions, actually.
Okay, so we've got tariffs, shifting trade, supply chain knots, even this TikTok influence. It's a lot to navigate. How can rural communities and individual farmers actually cope and build some resilience? We saw some ideas from Conterra again, and also the USDA's Economic Research Service.
Yes, focusing on adaptation is key. Conterra had some practical suggestions for farmers. Things like diversifying what you grow, maybe looking into value-added processing on the farm.
Like making cheese instead of just selling milk.
Exactly. Or direct-to-consumer sales, farmers markets, maybe getting certified for regenerative practices, things that can create different income streams.
Makes sense. What else?
Really focusing on being cost efficient, protecting those margins we talked about, staying super informed on policy changes, being ready to pivot, and crucially, working with lenders who really get agriculture.
And the USDA ERS data showed some positive signs in rural areas too, despite the challenges.
It did, which is encouraging. They reported recent growth in the rural population, actually, because more people are moving in from cities than moving out. It suggests rural areas still hold appeal.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and they also noted poverty has generally been trending down in most rural counties over the last decade or so. Employment in rural areas had also bounced back pretty close to pre-pandemic levels by early 2023.
Any signs of new economic drivers?
Well, one thing they highlighted was the slow but steady growth of clean energy jobs in rural areas. Still small, like 1% of jobs in 2021, but it points to a potential new way to diversify economies and build resilience down the road.
So it's a picture of change, challenges, but also adaptation and maybe some new opportunity.
I think that sums it up well.
Now, for everyone listening, especially if you're new to farming or thinking about it, we wanted to add a kind of bonus insight here. It ties back to that TikTok discussion.
Right. Because for new farmers, social media isn't just something happening to the world, it's a tool you can actively use.
How so? Beyond just watching trends.
Absolutely. Think about platforms like TikTok, Instagram, even local Facebook groups. They can be amazing for direct-to-consumer marketing. You can tell your farm story, show your practices, show people where their food actually comes from.
Build that direct connection.
Exactly. Bypass some of the complicated traditional supply chains. When people feel connected to you and understand the reality of farming, the good and the bad, like maybe how tariffs are affecting you,
They might be more willing to support you. Take a fair price.
that's the idea.
Yeah.
You build empathy and understanding. You can use these platforms to educate people why support local. What are the environmental benefits? How do these big trade policies actually impact my farm?
Could it even help with funding?
Potentially, yes. Things like crowdfunding campaigns or signing people up for a CSA community-supported agriculture could get real traction through smart social media engagement. It's direct financial support.
So, in this world where narratives are shifting all the time, new farmers can actually use these tools to shape the conversation themselves, build their own resilient customer base.
Precisely. It's about being proactive, authentic, and building those connections online.
Well, that feels like a good place to wrap up this deep dive.
Yeah.
I think the main takeaway is the agricultural world is incredibly dynamic right now. You've got global trade, supply chains, even social media all swirling around.
And this is important for people starting out. If you stay informed, if you're adaptable, opportunities are definitely there.
Absolutely. We really encourage you to think about how all these interconnected pieces might play out in whatever you're planning or doing in agriculture.
Definitely food for thought.
And maybe one last thing to mull over. What other unexpected forces might pop up and shape farming's future? And how can new farmers get ready for, well, whatever comes next?
That's a big question.
It is. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We hope this exploration has been valuable. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
Hitting that like button and smash that subscribe.